Welcome back, everybody. You might notice that I don't have a microphone on, so I hope that my projection will be sufficient for you to hear what I'm saying. We had a little technical glitch, but we're going to remedy that for next week. For the time being, I hope you enjoyed this last Sunday. Today, what I really wanted to highlight was how significant Jubilee continues to be. Now, in the service, you heard me go into some of the historical precedents for Jubilee, because debt forgiveness was actually a fairly common practice in the ancient world, especially when there was turnover. When one community, one nation, one empire moved in, the first thing they would typically do was cancel all debts. They would forgive all debts, and that would help jumpstart the economy, but it would also probably create a bit of goodwill among those who owed heavily. And what it did in the Hebrew Scriptures specifically is it kept debt bondage from ultimately crippling their community, right? It kept debt bondage from causing this type of injury, which it has caused and continues to cause in our world for those that had no way out, those that had sold family members, that had basically auctioned off their bodies and time for the purpose of paying off these debts that were essentially unpayable. The Hebrew Scriptures are well aware of that. And so Jubilee is a time of reset. They are attempting to establish a new way. It's a new life, it's a new day. And it's important for us to have those practices in our own spiritual lives, as well as the life of our community, and arguably the life of the world. You know how if you just sort of keep going the same way, you find yourself plunging into a situation of, for lack of a better word, let us say stuckness. And this stuckness is not only spiritually paralyzing, but it casts a pall over everything you do in life. And the Hebrew Scriptures are well aware that debt of one kind or another did that for its community. And for them to follow the way of the great emancipator, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, they needed to practice this year of Jubilee. The reason I thought it was so important to not only highlight the historical precedents, but to also shine a light on the ways in which Jubilee continues to play a part in our life is because I think some of us tend to look at things that happen in the biblical text as a bit dated. Right? And there are certain practices that we would in no way want to bring into 2025. And yet here's a kind of prophetic example of something that we would do well to perhaps heed, right? I know that it has encouraged and inspired a great number of people. I named some examples, and I even showed a little news clip of a church in Lincoln, Nebraska that has paid off well over 100 people's medical debt and perhaps affected countless others. Through a fundraising campaign where they partnered with collection agencies, bought the secondary debt, and paid it off. And people were giving their testimonies about how uplifting it has been, and how the church itself has benefited, as the church always does when it puts itself out there on behalf of others. We know what that feels like, right? There's a kind of beautiful compensation in that practice. And so I was encouraged by that and wanted to share that with you. But one thing I did not mention, at least in entirety, is I mentioned the debt collective, but I didn't talk about the particular mechanism that the debt collective uses to help pay off debt. That mechanism is called the rolling jubilee. So they are lifting the practice of Jubilee from the biblical text, and they are putting it into practice. I believe that I mentioned that they've canceled over $32 million in personal debt, and they've partnered with something called the New Economy Project. They've testified before representatives of Congress and other governing bodies in an effort to alleviate this terrible, seemingly endless burden that has been placed on people. And when you're in that situation where it doesn't feel like there's any way out, we know how awful and frightening that can be. So we want to practice the celebratory Jubilee that allows people to feel hopeful, to see that there's an end, and know that they're going to get supported reaching that end. Because ultimately, what is the end? The end is community. The end is connection. And we can't have community or connection if people are suffering unimaginably under this terrible burden that they can't get out from under. So I hope that you took that as a reminder and maybe even as a bit of inspiration for ways in which we can intervene right now where we are as the church. Now, this coming Sunday, just a little sneak peek, we're beginning Black History Month. And so I hope to continue to touch on some of these themes because we know that all forms of prejudice, discrimination, and bondage are connected ultimately historically. So I hope to continue to touch on that in the weeks to come and pray that you have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you next week.